Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program hosted by B'nai B'rith Connect, our Young Professionals Division. I'm Rebecca Rose, Associate Director of Development and Special Projects here at B'nai B'rith International, and I'll be hosting today's discussion along with Scott Knapp, B'nai B'rith Senior Vice President and Chair of Connect. We are excited today to speak with Jordan Blashek and Christopher Haugh about their timely new book, Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Ground. A special shout out to B'nai B'rith Connect leader Josh Suchin for introducing us. Back in 2015, Jordan Blashek, a Republican and a Marine, and Chris Haugh, a Democrat and a son of a single mother from Berkeley, California, formed an unlikely friendship. Jordan was fresh off his service in the Marines and feeling a bit out of place at Yale Law School. Chris was yearning for a sense of mission after leaving Washington, D.C. During their time at Yale, Jordan and Chris's friendship blossomed, not in spite of, but because of their political differences. So they decided to hit the road in search of reasons to strengthen their bond in an era of strife and partisanship. What followed is a 3-year adventure story across 44 states along 20,000 miles of road to find out exactly where the American experiment stands. They witnessed the full scope of American life from lobster trawls and jazz clubs of Portland and New Orleans to the streets of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the prisons of Detroit, where former addicts and inmates painstakingly put their lives back together. Union is a road narrative, a civics lesson, and an unforgettable window into one epic friendship. We're lucky enough to have them join us to talk about their incredible journey to understand America in 2020. Jordan, Chris, welcome. We're grateful to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
I'd like now to turn things over to Scott, who will be moderating and asking some questions. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Jordan and Chris, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And we welcome all of our B'nai B'rith Connect members, friends, and guests who have joined us for this special event. As Rebecca said, my name is Scott Knapp. I'm the chair of B'nai B'rith Connect. Also in disclosure, I'm an attorney, so I feel your pain from your law school days and actually started laughing at the beginning of the book where it jumps right into Socratic method in a civil procedure class. And I completely identified with it. But let's jump right into things and actually get there. You met at Yale Law School in 2015 and you struck up this unexpected friendship. Can you each briefly tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you became friends with each other?
Sure, happy to start. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California. Great set of Jewish parents who raised me with a service mentality. My mom launched a nonprofit that sends care packages to troops, and my father used to read to me from the Book of Virtues growing up. And so when I went off to college, I decided that I wanted to join the Marine Corps. I also, at that time, joined a PI, where I got to be the master for my chapter and experience what leading a group was really like. And I also got to experience what it's like to debate with some of the smartest people who all had an opinion on how they could do your job better than you. So that was sort of a formative experience. I go off to the Marines. I have an amazing experience there as well, and decided I wanted to get out and I wanted to pursue my JD because I thought it might open up the door to going into government at some point. But I also wanted to keep the door open to working in business. So I get to law school, a little unsure of the path I'm going to take in life, and find that everyone around me is very sure about the path they're going to take. And they're all going to be Supreme Court justices. So they're heads down in class and debating fiercely over legal topics. And I just was in a different mental space. And it was around that time that I met Chris. And I'll let Chris sort of describe his own journey, but I felt that we were on the same page from the first moment we met. And our first conversation, it was meant to be 30 minutes. It ended up being 3 hours, and we explored every topic that we both loved. Things like our appreciation for great literature, our love of war reporting, the influence of our mothers on our lives. Chris is not Jewish, but he also has a strong Jewish-like mother. And we found we had this quick early bond that was able to blossom away from politics.
Yeah, I would just add that. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. It's so good to be here. Yeah, I would only add that much like Jordan, I was predisposed to friendships that sort of transcended politics. I had spent 2 years or 3 years in DC and 2 years at the State Department before coming to law school, where there was a larger mission than partisanship. That it wasn't about being Democrat or Republican. I mean, of course, we were working under a Democratic administration at the time, but it was about diplomacy. And the job was sold to me as a job that you could, quote Kennedy and Reagan in the same speech, and that this larger mission was far more important than any sort of, the way you voted or any other sort of partisan metric. So by the time I got to law school and met Jordan, it didn't feel strange to be friends with someone across the aisle. And of course, this was 2015, and that started to change pretty quickly as the year marched on.
So I know the road trip started with a vision going from New Haven back to California, because I think it was Jordan was going to be serving as the man of honor, not maid of honor, the man of honor at his sister's wedding. And so you discussed doing a road trip and stopping in Chicago or at Mount Rushmore, Yellowstone. How did you choose the specific places that you were going to visit along the way?
Go ahead, Chris. Okay, well, so on that trip, we had no real agenda as we thought about what we wanted to see in the country. Chris had a friend in Chicago, and we thought we might stop there. And then after that, I had always wanted to visit Mount Rushmore. It features prominently in this book, American Places by William Zinsser, and I've always loved that book. And after that, we had a friend in Montana, and then Crater Lake seemed really beautiful in Oregon. So, every stop along the way, we had some reason to go there. Because we just had something we wanted to see. And on that first road trip, I think we realized that there was something deep and beautiful out on the road that we wanted to see more of, especially as the country kind of convulsed under the weight of political division in 2016. And so as we got back on the road for subsequent road trips, there were always some combination of serendipity. We ran into someone, or we just happened to pass by something that caught our eye and we stopped. And deliberate planning. So there were some things we just really wanted to see, either because one of us had a special attachment to it, or there was an experience or something about American life we were hoping to get from that site.
Is there one moment that you could think of throughout the entire journey that you would want to relive again, and what would it be and why?
I mean, I would relive any and all nights in New Orleans again, but maybe that's not exactly the most informative, but certainly one of the most fun events evenings we spent on the trip. Yeah, I mean that would be the first answer that comes to mind, especially now when we can't travel as readily. You can't be in the French Quarter listening to jazz, packed in shoulder to shoulder with total strangers anymore. So that's front of mind. But it's not the most profound say. I think for me, Tulsa was perhaps the most powerful, the place that was the most surprising, and as a result, one of the places that remains kind of the most relivable. We had gone to Tulsa fully intending just to spend a night at a motel before we headed north towards Detroit. And we ran into, well, I guess maybe Jordan had reached out to a friend in the area who said, look, stay one extra night. I want to introduce you to some people. And Scott, as you know, having read the book, it became a place where we met a woman running a drug diversion or a prison diversion program for women and mothers. The communications director at a new park called the Gathering Place, which was an attempt to bring together a very segregated city. And amongst others who told us these amazing stories about how they had sort of leaned into the future of Tulsa instead of turning away from a very dark past. And I think that sort of moment of realization that we had stumbled across this amazing place that kind of taught us a lesson, not just about each other and our sort of bipartisan friendship, but the country itself and its resilience, something that I could always relive.
Hopefully we all can go visit New Orleans again soon, and Hurricane Zeta doesn't mess it up too much. It's going to hit
Amen.
days. Jordan, what about you? Is there one moment that you would want to relive?
Yeah, I really loved the barbecue we had in Page, Arizona, with this group of veterans we had met. We had stopped for just an hour to go shooting at this gun range. Chris had never shot before, and I wanted to show him some of my old military craft. And we ended up going into this gun range. It turned out that everyone who worked there was a military veteran. I had served in similar units to one of the owner of the store, and he and I had some friends in common. And he invited us to have a barbecue that evening with the employees of the store. and they were doing an enlistment for one of the men's nephews who's joining the US Army. And it just was this incredible serendipitous evening that was warm and welcoming and nostalgic for me, and I think eye-opening for Chris. And it just was one of those things you could have never planned. And I think I'll remember that night forever.
I know you had an unexpected stop in Idaho that you probably didn't expect, but is there something that you would skip again? If you said, I did this trip, I never want to do that again, or that was a horrible moment in my life, is there something that you can think of that you would say, I wish that never happened?
Yeah, I can start on this one too. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we did it. It ended up being a very fun chapter in the book, but I'm not sure I could spend another day on a lobster trawler. I love boats, or at least I thought I did. I love fishing, my few experiences, but there's something about rotting bait fish and being sort of stuck in intimate quarters with it for hours and hours on ends that I'm not sure I could ever do it again. But of course, we went to Portland. We met this amazing lobsterman named Willis, Captain Willis Spear, and he taught us so much, and it was such an amazing experience. But I spent much of the day trying to keep my breakfast down. So I don't know if I could do that again.
Jordan, can you keep your breakfast down? Or?
I actually loved that experience. I would do that one again. I think I can't think of any real experience that I wouldn't want to do over. They were all so interesting and meaningful. So the only thing that comes to mind, and I apologize in advance to anyone from Kansas, but any new road trip, I would probably just skip Kansas.
Save you some time and gas money, I'm sure too. But
I have a question real quick. Did you set out and think about like this could be a book, or did it sort of kind of naturally morph into that?
Natural, very natural. The first road trip was truly just we just intended to get across the country, have some fun along the way, and we had these amazing conversations. We saw so much that we said, we should do this again. And it wasn't really until that second road trip when we went from California across the Southwest and back to Berkeley, where I am currently, that we decided, hey, maybe there's something that we can bring back. Maybe there's a message here. The fact that we're able to communicate, the fact that we have these experiences on that second road trip, we ended up at Page, where Jordan was just telling us the story about meeting the men at the gun range. That we said, what, maybe we can do a documentary, maybe we can do a book, maybe we can do something. We started tossing around ideas. And I remember it well to this day. I remember getting a call from Jordan, I think it was right after the second road trip, where he said, hey, why don't we write a book? And that was the sort of genesis of it. And then we became very directed as to where we were headed.
In so many ways, the experiences we have, whether it be Rebecca up in New York or me in South Florida, it's vastly different than somebody, in Kansas or Idaho or Arkansas. And Americans have different views of realities of the country. Though we're living in an age of globalization, many of us simply don't know what it's like to live in somebody else's shoes. And given the enormity of the United States, how can we better understand each other's situations?
That's a great question. We're big believers in going to the scene. And of course, that's a big problem right now. When we finished writing this book, we turned to each other and we said, that's going to be one of our big messages, is go out, see it for yourself. That's the journalistic ethos, and it became our ethos with Union. Of course, that's so complicated now to go out and see people. So, we're still trying to figure out exactly how this works in this day and age. How do you go put yourself in someone else's shoes? And, we're big believers. I mean, we're authors, so we're big believers in rich storytelling. And so, picking up a book, reading about different types and coming from different voices has been really instrumental to our journey. And especially now when you can't go see the world. But one thing I'll also say, we may be very different in some senses. We come from very different places. We have very different cultural backgrounds or religious backgrounds, whatever it may be. But ultimately, at least in the United States, and at least on our journeys, we found that no matter where you are, whether it's Idaho or whether it's Chicago or South Florida or California, New York, we all speak a very similar political language. And maybe not all, but most do. And we use different words to articulate the same values. And when you boil it all down, you get to this kind of collection of ideas, whether it's liberty and justice and second chances and dignity, the importance of everyone having dignity and being given dignity. These are ideas that resonate everywhere we go. So I think while it's important to acknowledge the differences and to dive into them and embrace them, it's also really comforting to know that at least from our experience, we all speak a similar language underneath it all.
During your travels, was there any individual who truly inspired you? Because this wasn't just a venture about sightseeing and looking at, the presidents on the side of Mount Rushmore, but you also really dove into the cultural aspect of where you were. Can you tell us about any of the individuals and why that still sits in your mind?
Yeah, well, there are a number of individuals who inspired us, and the third part of the book, the last third, is really the story of all those people. And we had met a bunch of them earlier, and then went back because of how much they had inspired us. And one of them who sticks out for me is this musician in New Orleans named John Michael. And it's actually a funny story how we even got to him. Chris had met him years earlier on an airplane, and they sat across the aisle from each other, kind of had a good conversation, and then had just sort of stayed in touch. And when we showed up in New Orleans, we sent him a text saying we were here writing a book. We wanted to understand the music scene and how it might contribute to a broader American culture. And he set us up with a bunch of musicians. And so we spent a few days meeting all of them. Everybody talked about him in almost this reverential tone. And when we finally got to him, he articulated a number of the themes of the book unprompted on his own in ways that Chris and I couldn't even have imagined. And he used this one metaphor where he said the reason music brings people together is because there's nothing dualistic about it. You can appreciate a tune in any variety of ways. There's an infinite number of ways to love a piece of music. Whereas politics is binary, and it forces us into these two camps. There's no gray area. You're either on this side or that side. And that's the problem we face as a country right now. And his ability to articulate that so cleanly and to have so much grace for people who approach politics with different perspectives was really incredible. And he's a musician, but everyone who talked about him as a future politician, because he clearly just had such a way of connecting with other people and articulating these uplifting ideas in a powerful way. So I was very inspired by him.
Chris, anybody other than that?
Well, I was actually going to say the same guy. He's been on my mind recently, but I will also add, Pete, who's a truck driver who we spent a week with, was inspiring in many ways to both of us, and I think especially me as well. In that, here was this larger than life kind of figure, big guy from Daytona Beach, Florida, who tattoos on his arms, and comes wearing a "Make America Great Again" shirt on day one. And so I thought I knew, a lot about this guy just from the way he dressed and the way he sort of presented himself to the world. And over the course of these 5 days on the road, driving from Las Vegas to Slidell, I learned that was not at all the case. That this was here's this complicated man who may have voted for someone different than I may have voted for, but who are, we were able to very quickly find common ground along all kinds of issues, whether it's climate change or various other very like pregnant issues at the time, and that was sort of very inspiring to my half of the mission too, because I said I don't understand this country, I don't understand the heart and soul of the average American. And we had to go out and see people. We had to go talk to them. We wanted to bring back stories that allowed us to zig while everyone else was zagging, that broke expectation. And Pete was a big kind of inspiration to both of us on that front. He sort of starts the second act of this book, where we go from some kind of diving headlong into politics, finding that maybe that's not where we're going to find our common ground, deciding to look for, quintessential American stories, and we found Pete. And so Pete sort of is our thesis for the rest of the book. It's to say, if we can't be known based on, a snap judgment, then who are we really? And let's get into it. And so, I would point him out as my most inspiring, beyond John Michael.
So speaking of that topic, given today's political climate, many people are afraid to even broach politics with their friends or family members, let alone coworkers. Disagreements are no longer viewed as mere policy disagreements, but they can actually break up friendships or cause estranged family members. What suggestions do you have for people struggling with this very difficult matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Chris and I figured out a lot of our ways of communicating through trial and error. And early on in our friendship, we often had our conversations break down because we didn't really know how to engage in a productive way. And the way we engaged led to conflict. And so, my first thought on this is that if you do want to talk about politics with friends and family, which, it's an election, so it's hard to avoid the topic. One thing to keep in mind is just the way you're approaching it. So it's very common today to be very moralistic about our side, and we phrase things in a way that essentially says, if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with your worldview or your morality. And if you approach politics in that way, conversations won't go well. It's going to feel aggressive to the other person. They might get defensive and try to argue back so that they claim the moral high ground themselves. And those conversations devolve into a tit for tat argument where each side is just trying to convince the other that their worldview is right and the other side's is wrong. And Chris and I found ourselves in that situation often. The way to address that is to approach political conversations with the intent to listen and learn. Everybody has a lived experience and a set of values that they approach politics with that are informed by something really deep inside. And if you can listen and try to bring out what are those deeper values, you might learn something very deep about the person on the other side, whether it's your friends or family. That's actually enriching and will expand the conversation rather than contract it into this narrow political sense. And so just as an example, I think over time, Chris and I realized that often we were approaching things through our worldview, which was informed by our professions. So as a Marine, it mattered a lot to me that the United States was viewed as a decent moral country because I had friends who went overseas and risked their lives for it, and some died for it. And so when America is called racist or deeply corrupt country, that strikes a painful note for me that I'm going to react viscerally to. And on the other side, Chris approached a lot of the things we saw on the road as a skeptic, and it took me a long time to accept that fact. But it was easier once I understood that he's a journalist and he's not just going to take my word for it that America is good and healthy. He wanted to see it on the ground, and I wasn't going to convince him until he got to see it for himself. And so understanding those perspectives and worldviews allowed us to have these much deeper, richer conversations because neither of us were on the defensive.
Beautifully said.
Very much so. But, B'nai B'rith is an organization that's deeply committed to fighting anti-Semitism. I was wondering if you came across any anti-Semitism along the way, and how did you all react to it?
Well, there's only one instance that I can recall, and Jordan might actually be able to speak to this better than I can. But there's one incident at a Trump rally where we were outside the rally amongst the sort of protesters and rally goers are coming out, and it was a very combustible place. And if you've read the book or like Scott or you're planning on it, that area ends up kind of erupting in violence, and it ends up being a very chaotic scene. With police kind of moving forward and certain protesters fighting back. And at the end of this kind of melee in the streets, we were kind of on our way out and feeling kind of dejected about everything we had just seen, because on the margins of this event, we had seen dialogue, we had seen rally goers talking to protesters, handshakes, the sort of first stirrings of common ground is what we write. But then it had all broken down into this very ugly scene. And as we were walking away, out of the back of a dark car, someone offered a Hitler salute. And I know that it shook both of us, and I think it probably shook Jordan particularly. But I think it speaks to the fact that there are ugly elements about our politics and our national history, our world history. And Jordan and I often get asked questions about, do you have limits? And in this Common Ground project, and the answer is absolutely. I hope I've never come anywhere near those limits, and I can say definitively Jordan never has. But common ground and our attempt to sort of breathe civility back into some of these dialogues doesn't mean compromising our values. It doesn't mean not arguing and pushing as hard as one can for the policies and ideas that we care deepest about. It's just a way of hopefully getting closer to our better angels. It's a way of making sure that the other side hears us. But no, I mean, absolutely that there's always that space where that's kind of why I corrected myself earlier when I said there's this language that unites all of us. Well, it's maybe not all of us. If it is the majority of us and the majority of us aren't talking, then it's harder to push those fringe elements further to the fringe.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with everything Chris said. As far as I can remember, that was the only instance that um, we experienced any real anti-Semitism across the country.
You had another interesting little part that's controversial in some ways. You decided to go along the southern border. You actually went into Mexico a few times, into Tijuana and Juarez and a few other places. Can you tell us about what perspective you gained from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2018, we really wanted to go down to the southern border, in part because it had become such a focal point of our politics. It just came up in various ways over and over and over again as this flashpoint or lightning rod, and we wanted to see it because it's this thing that looms so large in our politics, and yet so few people have actually experienced it. So we decided to drive down to Tijuana, and from there wove in and out of the border all the way to Juarez and El Paso. And I don't know if we had anything in mind for what we would expect. And the truth is, we were both very nervous going across the road on the other side. And part of that was driven by stories of cartels that we had heard and just the uncertainty. We just didn't know it. And it turned out that it's actually a beautiful road, perfectly paved, amazing food along the way, with the same kind of trucks that drive along our highways driving on the Mexican side. And so it soon became very familiar, even though Chris and I had a few sort of comically embarrassing scares on that side. And in the end, we had some good conversations with an El Salvadorian immigrant who was trying to get into the United States, with some Mexican customs agents, and then a variety of people on the US side who view the border as their backyard and cross every day to go get groceries. And so it was very eye-opening to take this site that was very unfamiliar and make it familiar very quickly, and just get a sense for what life looks like down there.
Chris, do you have anything to add about the experience along the southern border?
Yeah, I think Jordan said it great. All I would add is that there was certainly this element of fear while we were down there, and as Jordan said, I mean, it was comical. I mean, there was a time where there was a backup in the hills in Sonora, and I think everyone in the car that day's imagination was running wild as to what could have caused this rural backup. And suddenly there's these pickup trucks coming down the hillside on a dirt road, and we were in between all these trucks, and they pointed at us, and of course our imaginations go even crazier. And it turns out that there was just this was a way that you could take as a car, not a truck, to get around some deferred maintenance that was going on the road up ahead in a very, very normal way. And here were these citizens just pointing out that we could avoid this 4-hour pileup or something along those lines by following up the hillside. And so, for us, that really stood for the fact that, I mean, it stands for the go to the scene fact, that the idea that we were talking about earlier, that the further away from something you are, the less you understand it, the more likely you are to be afraid of it, to create boogeymen in your mind about what it is. And the closer you get to it, the less likely you are to find that your worst fears are true. And that's what we found on the border. I remember walking into a Arizona gas station, and Jordan and I were asking, so how are the roads down there? And one of the guy, the station agent, saying something along the lines of, "Oh, they're bad." And we're like, "Oh, like really bad?" And they're like, "Yeah, pretty bad down there." And we're like guns bad, like cartels bad? And he's like, "No, like there's potholes and there's there's small lanes and things like that. And he laughed at us. And I think that's really indicative of the closer you get to the border, the more it's human, the more it's real, the more it's normal. That guy even turned out to be wrong. The closer you get to that road, the more you find out it's smooth, it's easy, it's beautiful. Much like any other amazing road through a national park, say in the United States.
If I counted correctly, it was 44 states, or was it 45?
Sadly, 44.
44.
We tried desperately to get to 45, and we got flummoxed by a flood along the Missouri River.
Which 6 did you miss?
Oh yes, we did that. We've tried to do this once before and it went terribly. So let's see if we can do it. But Hawaii, Alaska, North Dakota, West Virginia. Jordan, you want to help bail me out here?
Washington.
Say it again.
Washington.
Yep, there you go. That's 5. Oh, and Missouri, which is the one we missed when we tried to get across the river and got stuck in the mud in the middle of the night.
Have either of you been to those 6 before, or any of the 6?
I think we may have both. I think we've both been to all 50. Is that right, Jordan? Or are you missing one?
Nope, we've been to all of them.
Okay, I was going to say where the sequel is going to come out for the next 6. Driving obviously to Hawaii would make it a little bit challenging, but
that could be difficult.
So a question about the media, because I think the media helps foster that fear that you were just talking about, even with the southern border in many ways. And it plays a major role in our political climate on both sides of the aisle. Social media obviously has given the platform and even more misinformation of various sorts. How can we put out a message of unity during such a troubling time that we have?
That's a great question. I think there's things like the 2 candidates for the Utah governor's race who put out a message together. I think more efforts to just reach across and say that there's, of course, politics is going to be a fight, and we're going to wage it in good faith. But there's something higher than this, and let's all step back and recognize that there's something higher. It takes really strong, good leaders to be willing to do that. But the more of it we have, the more it catches on. And so I hope more leaders recognize that's something they need to do, that losing gracefully is important. It's just as important. And there's always 2 years later that you can run again, 4 years later. So I think that's one. I think 2 is in the smaller things. So, congressmen should be having more dinners together. There's a few groups that I know of in Congress where the caucus will be bipartisan, and they'll meet every week for a meal. There's one specifically for veterans called the 4 Country Caucus, and they meet every week. And I think more examples of that and publicizing it. It feels weird to publicize something intimate, but they can do the country a big service by showing that, hey, we served together overseas and we served together in Congress, and so we can sit and have a meal together. I think that's also great for the country to hear. And then lastly, it needs to seep into the culture. And there are a few powerful cultural leaders who I think can really take this up. And it's just going to take someone to break through to show them that they can really do enormous good for the country if they start bringing that message out. But my hypothesis is that this is going to happen. The country has just reached a breaking point, and I don't think we can handle much more of this for too much longer. And so I think there's this latent desire for better politics, for more common ground and civility. And so if that's true, I think the culture will respond in short order.
Is there any view of your own that you held before the trip that has changed after spending time with each other, and you say, I was just dead wrong in what I believed?
I don't think we either of us moved that immensely on anything. We certainly moved one another in oftentimes subtle but enormous ways. We were at this for 3 years, over nearly 20,000 miles, which means lots of conversation. And often now when some topic comes up with friends, when Jordan is or isn't around, I'll often find myself saying things that feel like an echo of what Jordan has told me in the past, or what Jordan has argued. And so there's all these sort of subtle and minute ways that our policy thinking has shifted. I'd say the biggest change for me has been my theory of change, my theory of progress. In conversation with Jordan, we often found that we wanted the same ends. We just talked about the means in different ways. And when we actually started to analyze them, put them under a microscope, we found that we weren't all that far apart. And Jordan often talked to me about tradition and his sort of Burkean philosophy and the concept of putting friction into a system so that everyone can feel heard, and there's a deliberative process that gets us to the right answer instead of what's the most expedient answer. And that's something that all of that resonated with me, but it wasn't necessarily on the tip of my tongue when I'm talking about progress. But it is there's nothing about that is a anathema to my worldview. In fact, it's supportive of my worldview. And so I often talk about progress and change, my theory of change in that way now, which has Jordan's stamp all over it. But that's just one, on our conversations about climate change or immigration or whatever the case may be. Jordan's imprint is all over that as well, but maybe not with as much real estate as my theory of change.
Jordan, yeah. In the book, you talked about your favorite rabbi and noted some parallels between the United States and the Jewish people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and it's dangerous to note your favorite rabbi when I actually do know quite a few rabbis, and so I will not reveal who the favorite rabbi is.
I didn't say his name either. So.
But yes, so some of the parallels that I love, I think we all know, some of the historical parallels of the Jews fleeing tyranny in Egypt, the first Americans fleeing tyranny from the UK. There are interesting parallels like that. But I think the deeper ones that I love are just the idea of a nation built around a covenant. And the Jewish people, the covenant at Mount Sinai, where we make our covenant with God, and it binds the Jewish people together under this one faith and this one people for generations. And it applies equally to that generation who made the covenant, and then all the way through every generation is a very similar thing to the idea of the American nation, where our founders, the founding generation, came together. They made a covenant in the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution itself. And then every generation of Americans has the opportunity to engage in that shared project and to wrestle with what it means to be an American today under new circumstances, just like the Jewish people wrestle with what does it mean to be Jewish today in new circumstances. And we're the only two nations on the planet that are bound by a covenant. And so I find that deeply inspiring to get to be part of both of those incredible projects. Getting to actually be out on the road to take up the notion of the Jewish journey, but for America was also very meaningful for me. I loved getting to sort of infuse the book with some of those ideas.
Yeah, it made it entertaining from a Jewish perspective. I definitely, could identify with some of those thoughts as well, and I appreciated them being in there. What key lessons would you want readers to take away from reading about your journey?
I can start. One of them is certainly to be humble in the face of the diversity of this country. We went out there and we've met people of all different walks of life, who have all different origin stories and from all different geographies. And like I said earlier, we all spoke this amazing kind of similar language, to Jordan's point about our covenant and this sort of civic religion that us Americans hold. But we're also just full of complexity. Like, this country contains so many multitudes. And in confronting that, Jordan and I were rendered so humble. It's impossible not to be when you're confronted with it, because when everyone sort of undermines your expectations in good ways, then you have to listen. You have to learn. You can't make bald statements that don't actually get to the truth of the matter as easily, or you can't do it as easily because you remember people. You remember Pete, or you remember Mimi, or you remember having met someone who gives you reason for pause when you're declaring this is how the world works. And so I really hope that's one takeaway that people have when they read Union. I have others, but I don't want to step on Jordan's toes if he wants to share one.
No, that was great.
Well, in that case,
I was going to say, that means you're free to share others.
The other one that comes to mind is hope, which tethers to Jordan's favorite nameless rabbi, which is, we found hope pretty much everywhere we went, almost everywhere we went. We found hope in the most desperate of circumstances at times. Tulsa, where we opened this conversation, was one of the places where we found some of the most hope, even though we also found one of the most frank conversations about a very, very difficult history. And that's something we're carrying forward too, Jordan and I, that with enough work, with enough active optimism, which to us is hope, then there is a very, very bright future for America. We may be in the doldrums, we may be even worse than the doldrums, in the middle of a tempest, but we can come out the other side, and there are people willing to roll up their sleeves and work towards that future. And it is, in their memory and knowing that they are out there, that Jordan and I have carried this message of hope through the pandemic, through this crazy election season, and into 2020 and into 2021. And it's woven throughout Union, which you can see I have almost too many copies here.
So timely. When it was released in the summer.
That's right, July, late July. It was supposed to come out in May, but of course, that was a crazy time too.
No, but we really need this message of positivity right now. I mean, it feels like a breath of fresh air in this current situation that we all find ourselves in on either side. So, and you two might even want to think about running one day for you definitely, you're definitely both really well spoken, and speaking about very profound, important parts of what it means to be an American, and we can't lose sight of that. So we really wanted to thank you, Scott. I'll let you.
No, definitely, Jordan and Chris, thank you both for walking us through your once in a lifetime journey across the United States and sometimes into Mexico, showing us that despite all of the differences, some witty banter can bring us all back together. I'm sure all of us, after reading this book, want to jump into a car and start getting going. Certainly, we hope everyone stays safe throughout COVID, however that may be. And if you're able to travel and you want to, have at it. And that we can keep this conversation going even after what's probably going to be a difficult election for many. And I'll turn it back to Rebecca for some closing thoughts as well.
Well, thank you both so much, and to Scott. Just want to mention that, we should really think at the end of the day about the fact that we are all Americans. This is a really beautiful project of democracy. And, despite it all, am very proud to be an American. So we wish you both success with the book. Please stay healthy and safe. The book is Union, a Democrat, a Republican, a Search for Common Ground, by Jordan Blashek and Chris Haugh, and it's available wherever you purchase books. Definitely pick it up. Thank you all for tuning in. You can visit us at our website, b'nai for many more interesting discussions and programs. If you have an idea for a B'nai B'rith Connect program that you would like to see, we'd love to hear from you. Please send it to b'naibrithconnect@b'naibrith.org. Okay, thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Take care.